Hey, and welcome back to the Healthy High Life podcast. If it's your first time here, I appreciate you joining me, and I would love it if you could hit the like and subscribe button to help us grow the channel and to build a community for those who may be struggling and falling victim to some of the stereotypes, as well as those on the other end of the camp who have figured out how to live productively and driven whilst being able to enjoy some fire. The goal is to be able to provide actionable advice, experiences, and tips to those who need it so that we can all grow together, smoke some loud, and be proud of it. For those of you who are returning, thanks so much for coming back. It means the world, and I'd love to hear more about your experiences down in the comments. So on the previous episode, we covered the differences between mobility, flexibility, movement, and how we can use cannabis to enhance those processes and recovery. Today's focus, however, is how cannabis influences the mindset, both positively and negatively, and how we can use it intentionally to stay motivated in our lives, in our training, and to cover our overall wellness. The thing is, I'm sure you'll agree with me, cannabis can make you feel inspired, it can get us focused, and it can get us creative. However, there are instances where it can get us stuck to the couch. And those are the occasions that we want to learn how to pivot around and avoid so that we don't fall into some mindless habits that manifest in the background. So how are we going to use this to fuel motivation rather than kill it? Well, before we dive into it, I'd love to hear what you guys are smoking on tonight. I've got myself some cinnamon bun from Kulolo. It's a 50-50 hybrid, apparently pretty good for conversation and mental clarity. Pairing that up with a 1-to-1 ratio of cannatonic 19% CBD flower in order to get the best of both worlds. And this is where I'm aware that I'm going to get a lot of pushback from the recreational market, because these days everything is about blasting our heads off with as much THC as we could possibly get. But as much as I love getting high as well, we have to recognize that we have responsibilities and we need to be on our shit. And if we want to give cannabis a good name and a good reputation, we need to live by that word and example rather than fall into these bullshit stereotypes that tend to happen if you allow them to manifest. And so those who are going to give me pushback for coming at this with a little bit more of a responsible perspective, that's cool. I welcome your pushback because we can learn from everyone's opinion. We can learn from everyone's view, and there's always something that we can take away from it. So if you have any pushbacks, please chuck it down in the comments. I'd love to read it and I'd love to dive into it with you. However, as I said, my goal with this is to get the positive message out there. And the fact is, there are going to be those of us who are going to smoke it and utilize the plant. Doesn't really matter what anyone or anything else says. But the question is, are we going to use it in such a way where it's going to benefit us, or are we going to use it in a way where it's going to hinder us? That is the question. And the aim with this is to get the tools and the strategies and the intentions out there so that we can use it properly and actually create that positive space with cannabis. So cannabis has the potential to enhance focus, motivation, mental clarity, but it also leads to procrastination, avoidance, and many other negative instances when used without the correct intention. We're going to explore how it interacts with brain chemistry and how we can use it as a tool and not a crutch, as well as the mindset shifts needed in order to maintain the consistency around a well-balanced relationship with the plant, our training, and our overall wellness. Let's get this sparked up and let's dive into how cannabis affects our motivation. So first things first, THC. Now, this is where the problem's coming in, because ever since cannabis has really taken flight recently, over the last few years, it's become a lot more accessible to the masses. Now, that's great in some respects, but that's not true everywhere. And unfortunately, with greater access, means greater abuse, because in fine human fashion, we kind of fall into the shiny object syndrome and we end up taking things a little bit too far to the other extreme. So when it comes to THC, all we can see now across the recreational market is just strains out there pushing percentages of 27, 30 or percent THC. When you go back a good 15, 20 years, you weren't looking anything near that. You were maybe looking at, I don't know, 15 to 18% max THC in flower, but now we're up to 30. That's like double. And we'd be stupid to think that if we were overdoing it, we weren't going to cause any negative impacts. Not to mention nowadays, you've got all the dabs and all the other concentrates, which are, great every now and then. But those of us who are using it on a daily basis chronically, well, this is where that overuse comes in and this becomes an issue. Yes, we might have an endocannabinoid system in the body. And yes, it has receptors that correlate directly to these cannabinoids. However, it's not exactly made to be maxed out and redlined with concentrates yielding up to 90% THC. It's no wonder we're starting to see such a negative pushback across the socials of people telling you to stop smoking weed because it's causing issues. It's no fucking wonder. If you go and overdo it like that, you're going to manifest issues in the wrong direction. It's inevitable. And this is why pairing your use with mindful intention and some regulation can really help you pull those levels down and back to the point where you're not having to max out and use more and more and more just to get some feel. Which brings us back to how cannabis affects the brain. THC will temporarily boost our dopamine. This leads to increased pleasure and motivation, which is where we can get some benefits from. But if we're constantly maxing out our THC thresholds with these crazy levels, we're going to need more and more just to get that little boost of dopamine, which will then lead to a little bit of pleasure and motivation. But we won't get as much as we would have once got. Hence, we're then having to use more and more to get that same little feeling, which leads to that chronic overuse. And that chronic overuse can reduce our baseline dopamine, which makes everyday tasks less appealing and a lot harder to do without the use of cannabis. How can we use cannabis to support motivation instead of dependence? Well, this is where microdosing comes in. Microdose your THC and you'll be able to get that focus and flow state that everyone talks about when they use it. If you overdo it and you max those thresholds, in some respect, something's going to go wrong. But if you microdose it, you're going to get the best out of the plant for that job or that occasion that you've got coming up that you're wanting to use it for. It will help you get into that focus and it will help you get into flow. Pair that up with some CBD or just a nice balanced strain, nothing that's too high on either end. And that will help reduce the stress and anxiety that may come from the THC, which will then help support your consistent efforts over time when it comes to tasks at hand. Choosing strains that contain certain terpenes that will influence things like motivation and mental clarity. So anything, as I mentioned in previous episodes, that contains limonene, known for its uplifting, mood improving, and energy boosting effects. We've got terpenes like pinene. This enhances alertness and cognitive function. So you get a strain with those two terpenes in it, and you get the right ratio between THC and CBD, and you can just see how that's going to create a really productive environment for you to go and get shit done, providing you don't go and smoke the entire joint there and then. I touched on how it enhances focus and flow state. Well, let's get into that. As well as temporarily boosting our dopamine levels for a little bump of that motivation and wanting to do something, it can also help block external distractions, which then means it kind of enhances our presence in the job at hand. So we can get into that creative flow state, so to speak, which is why you'll see many athletes, especially now as cannabis gets a lot more accepted across the sports world, and creatives, musicians, people in film all use cannabis to help drop them into the zone to get into that next level of thought, which then ultimately yields all of these results. So for those of you who are against cannabis, well, sorry, technically you shouldn't be allowed to enjoy so many different types of music or so many different books or movies that are out there, because they are all born through the use of cannabis. And if you don't like cannabis, then technically you shouldn't like that stuff, right? But anyway, you see, used correctly and you can get some gold from it. But if you overdo it, then sure, just like anything, you overdo training, you're going to get rhabdo. You overdo weed, you're going to get fucked up. It's not rocket science, but we do need to just bring up some awareness so that we are focusing our efforts in the right direction, because where focus goes, energy flows. So if we start to focus on improving our relationship with the plant, we start to focus on dosing ourselves correctly and pairing that with the right purposes, we can then start to create the right energy in that direction, which will ultimately manifest in a new shift in mindset. And it's that shift in mindset that's going to help you catapult yourself into a productive relationship with this plant. So speaking of finding the right dose, if we're looking to be productive, we're going to be wanting low to moderate doses. This will really help us achieve focus. Whereas if we hit high doses, well, we can almost inevitably look forward to zoning out, which in some cases is not always bad. However, if your goal was to use it to get shit done, the last thing you want to be doing is just overdoing it and zoning out. So make sure you titrate your dose. A bit of trial and error, see how you go, play with different strains, ratios between CBD and THC, play with times of day, play with how you set your intention prior to sparking up. Quite literally, ask yourself, okay, why am I sparking up? What am I looking to get out of this for now? If you can't answer that question, then ask yourself another question. Should you really be sparking up? If the answer is yes, my goal is literally just to chill out, zone out, hang out, then yeah, go for it. Some strains can help promote clarity, especially when you look into their terpene profiles. That's where you'd really want to dig under the surface so you can get a bit more of an accurate picture on the effects. And then you compare that with what you'd like to use it with or use it for. There are other strains out there which will encourage that couch lock. So if you're using the wrong strain at the wrong time of day, then you're going to end up procrastinating rather than getting productive. And if you do that time and time and time again without realizing it, well, ultimately you're going to create that pattern, and that pattern is going to lead you down a very detrimental path. The further down that path you go without awareness, the harder it's going to be to come back up it. So in order to avoid that, there are a few ways in which we can stay productive whilst using cannabis. So make sure we pair it with structured routines. Again, that comes back to setting it with the intention. You might want to use it only for your training, or only use it for cognitive work, or when you're stretching, or maybe when you're journaling or setting the intention before you consume, you can create the direction in which you're going to go having consumed it. All these little things are going to help you set that space so that you're aware of how you're consciously using the plant. If you're pairing it with that structured routine, if you're setting the intention before, as well as dosing yourself. For example, I mentioned on the previous episode, I use only 1.5 grams a day, and I use that in such a way where I'll microdose a couple of hits every now and then just to get me into that flow state, that state of focus. Because I've got to be on it. I'm helping people all day long with their injuries, with their joints, with their mindset, with their nutrition, with their overall lifestyle. I can't be monging out. But what it allows me to do in that very slightly elevated state is to dig under the surface and look a little bit deeper into what this person is saying to me. And I'm able to then pull out some very useful stuff, which helps them going forward. Now, had I have over smoked, I'd be pretty useless in that situation. Maybe all the good shit would be happening in my head, but I wouldn't be able to communicate it and get it out. In line with building structured routines around your use, using training as an example, a lot of people, myself included back in the day, and a lot of people that I work with get very intimidated when they walk into a gym setting. They get a lot of fear, they get a lot of anxiety around it, in which case tools like cannabis can really help. Again, you're going for that 1-to-1 ratio CBD to THC. You're going to get a nice bump of focus and clarity, but that CBD is going to counter some of that paranoia, anxiety, and fear, which is going to allow you to calm down and go and explore what you're capable of in the gym without worrying about all the other shit that you had in your head as you walked into the gym, which, to be fair, we live more in torture in our own heads than we do in reality. So a lot of the stuff that you were intimidated by going into the gym, you'll be able to counter with a little bit of cannabis, and it will start to bring you down to a relatable level again, and you can get on with the job at hand, which is working on yourself from a place of self-care. And if it's not from a place of self-care, side note, it should be. The crucial thing here is avoiding some of the pitfalls around cannabis. And this is where it could be used as a crutch. If you're relying on it for motivation over and over again, it's going to potentially weaken that intrinsic drive. And if you get that weakened intrinsic drive, you may not have cannabis, which then means you may not have the catalyst to be able to get something going. So really, balance is key. And this is where tolerance breaks come in. A really nice way to periodize your use, a bit like training. You take a deload week in training, and all of a sudden you get the progress on the other end of it. It's just the same here. We're going to take a tea break. We're going to reduce those thresholds on the THC and the use, like both habitual and the chemical response, so that when we add it back in, we don't have to use quite as much for the same effect, if not more. And we break some of those habitual uses that come through the mindlessness. So much like we covered terpenes that influence motivation, mental clarity, like limonene, pinene. I think beta caryophyllene as well. It's like reduces stress. You could put that in there as well. We could also look to strains that contain humulene, for example. These suppress cravings. I mentioned that in the Munchies episode, and it prevents overindulgence. So when it comes to supporting your resilience and your mental strength and overcoming mental blocks, you could use strains that contain that in order to stop overindulging in other aspects and actually get on with the job at hand. Another terpene known for reducing stress and nervousness is linalool, found in lavender. Great for bringing us down and relaxing us and for calming down that anxiety. So the key takeaways of tonight is that really, yes, cannabis can enhance our motivation, our focus, and our flow, but only when we use it with the right intentions and purpose. If we overdo it with too much chronic use, with constant highly elevated THC thresholds, with dabs and concentrates and strains that are 30% plus, we're going to end up procrastinating and zoning out rather than making use of those flow states. Blasting too much THC into the system is going to negatively impact our dopamine response. And much like anything else, screens these days, everything is like 15-second videos and stuff like that. We're just looking for a quick hit of dopamine and then we're moving on. Quick hit, move on. If that same mechanism is happening with THC, if we keep increasing the strength of the THC, we're going to keep maxing out that envelope, and ultimately it's going to push the need for us to use more and more and more. When we pair that up with a parallel in fitness, that's like saying, right, I already train 7 days a week, I'm not making any more progress. How am I going to add more and more and more? You can't. You're going to end up burning out. But it's not made to be handled in such high levels over and over and over again. And so when it comes to re-regulating your dopamine levels, make use of tea breaks, make use of structured use, and weigh your daily dosage so that you stay regulated with it.